Welcome to this week's episode of Sojourner, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome back to the ongoing series, How Spaces Define Masculinity, a Black and Black Biracial Men's Initiative. My name is Carol Jean Matthews-Shifflett, and I am the CEO of the Sojourner Group. I'd like to start by thanking my sponsors, the Utah Jazz, Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, Pacific Island Knowledge to Action Resource, PCAR, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, UCASA, and Inlighten Productions. Session 2 brings you three new men. Commodore Stone, an Atlanta-based technical consultant for private organizations and government agencies. He's a community activities volunteer and previous youth mentor. His foundation years were developed in urban cities, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, Dallas, Texas, and Louisville, Kentucky. And then we have Chief Brian Lorkey. Chief is a retired deputy of the Unified Police Department in Kearns, Utah. He's currently head of the Security of Biofire Diagnostics. His foundation was developed in New York City and Northern California. And lastly, I bring you Pastor Marlon Lynch III, pastor and founder of Kingdom Huddle. He's an actor, was a lead mentor facilitator for Steve Harvey, and is president of the NAAGA FIST Foundation, which stands for the National African American Gun Association. The pastor's foundation was developed in Detroit, Michigan. Welcome, gentlemen. So when did you become aware of what society defines as masculinity? Again, society considers it one way and you may consider it another. When did you become aware of what society defines as masculinity and what worked for you in white spaces and in black spaces?
Oh boy. Most of my education on masculinity came through sports. I played, I was a swimmer, but I was also a water polo player. Water polo is a lot more aggressive than swimming. There's nothing aggressive about swimming. But water polo, we would do a drill. And this is something that we would do often. A lot of football players do this. It's a fumble drill. But we would call, when there's a loose ball, we'd call the man maker of all terms. And you fought over that ball. No matter what it took, you had to do whatever it took to get a hold of that ball. And that story is a little anecdotal, but as I grew up, I look back at that and think about, okay, what do I need to do a man? The man maker drill. Buck up, man up, those words, those terms that we have, and do whatever you need to do to get this done. So that's how my education about masculinity, or my definition of it. Now, whether it's right or wrong, that's how I went into adulthood looking at masculinity, is a strong physical presence and domineering presence as well.
Okay, all right. What about you, Mr. Stone?
Well,
Want me to repeat the question or you got it?
yeah. Can you rephrase that? Because I kind of twisted it into another thing. Repeat it one more time.
When did you become aware of what society defines as masculinity and what worked for you when navigating white society and navigating black society?
Okay, so yeah, that's what I thought. So when I became aware of it, well, see, one of the things that's crazy is I got also in the midst of all of that other madness I had to grow up through, I was getting bussed in 1975 when I was in seventh grade, going in seventh grade. So we literally were getting bused, integrated from the inner city out to the white neighborhoods. And so you start realizing how much, what you can and cannot, not get away with would be the wrong word. You started realizing, how to work things through and how to interact with folks. Initially, you kind of are always angry and that you have this angriness inside. But as time went along, and especially after I started learning from the folks we were bussed out there too and with, we all getting along. So I started realizing white folk, we're all red blood inside. So we're, next thing I know, we're all interdating. And, of course, our parents really hated us all then. They were mad. Don't used to be always, the white folks will say, don't you bring this black person home, and vice versa. Don't you bring this white girl. Next thing you know, we're all intermingling. And so I started learning that, okay, it's really it's a people thing, that we're all people. So fast forward a little further along, as I finished college, I'm 20 now, and I moved to Dallas, Texas, where there's a real interracial city. And so I started just learning and realizing that, okay, you can, if when presented with the same environment of people, you can work things are still the same. It's when you have to play the game is when you know whether or not you've got to start playing the game. In corporate America, mainly, I mean, to be honest, corporate America is worse than government, but they're both kind of the same. But in corporate America, where you can actually learn the traits of your managers / supervisors, because primarily they were all white folks 90% of the time. And so you just kind of, you play the game of their likes and not likes, and getting them comfortable with knowing that, that you're not just a black person, so that's how you learn. I learned to do the interfacing and learn to, interact. I had to. Next thing I know, I'm traveling around the world with everywhere. And a lot of the places I went to, there were different ethnicities. There was, you had to learn to make them understand or help them understand and like you, and kind of adjust to their world per se, until they're comfortable enough to knowing that you're okay and you're a regular person. And then, you kind of smooth it along. But you never let yourself I never just sold out. I just know how to play the game. And to this point now, I'm really happy that, and I think that it's a wonderful thing when people can just be all one people without all of with all of these other barriers. Because I went through probably as tight of a barrier as anybody's going to go through from a black male standpoint. I can't tell you how many times I've probably been stopped, arrested, the whole 9 yards. But I like life better when everybody's, on that same accord, and not having to, play that game so you can be yourself. And that's how I learned to start. When I learned about navigating through that world was once I started traveling and have to interact with everybody. Because you got to.
So here's a question for you before we go to Pastor Lynch. Some of those managers that you were navigating these spaces with, mm-hmm. were any of them women, and was that different?
Yes. And, to be honest, I always get along. I always got along with women. I mean, I get along with everybody. I just always got along with women better than the men part, because I was raised by women. So I've always had a healthy understanding of interaction with women, even the bad ones and the good ones. I just kind of know, okay, well, when it's all said and done, we're still supposed to think of them as, I think of them as the better side of the godly creature than men, because, generally that's where we all come from. So with that being said, though, these managers, a lot of times other people didn't get along with them. I always got along with them well, because I always figured that, I figured that if you kind of let them know that you have no harm and that you have a certain kind of love and heart for them, then they're okay. And they'll be on your side and you can be on their side. And, it works through that way. But, corporate America.
Okay. All right, Pastor Lynch, I'm going to bring that question to you. When did you become aware of what society defines as masculine? What worked for you in navigating white spaces and black spaces?
So growing up, it was very interesting for me, because a lot of times my family taught me that I just couldn't do it because I was black. You can't do it because you're black. You can't do it because you're black. There was no instruction or dialogue on why I couldn't do it because I was black. So I try to do that with my girls now. If I tell them not to do something, I always try to give a definition or a reason behind it. Growing up in Detroit, I'm gonna be honest with you, I was pretty much around African American Black people all my life until I received a full scholarship to go to Indiana University, and that was my first time being around a lot of white people, if you will. And that's when reality set in that, okay, you Black. You Black, because they made sure that they let me know that I was Black and I was on their turf. So I had to really learn by experience. I had to figure it out just through education. Just like Chief said, sports. One thing my coach did try to do is, although we had a Black team, he did try to bring up things when things would happen in the community about why things happen, whether it was Black on Black crime or whatever it was. He tried to give us some intellect on what was going on. But I really didn't have that upbringing going up around different cultures or ethnicities until I went to Indiana. And then when I moved to Utah, it was just like, oh my goodness, it was really.
That's a bigger culture shock.
When I moved to Utah, so that was a whole nother experience right there. So,
How do you find your maneuvering the spaces here?
it was challenging at first. It was very challenging, especially being from Detroit and being Black. It was really challenging. I mean, because people look at you differently, the way you talk, the way you act, and the first thing they want to know is where you from. That's the first thing they want to know. Secondly, what religion are you? So it's already a box for you before they even identify who you really are. But what I found very interesting is this, and some of you who know my kids, they like bright. They very light skin, fair skin, if you will. And some people who see my wife first, they think she married to a white male, and so I have had people tell me that your kids get treated a little differently because they not dark skinned, they Black, but because of the color of their skin, they fit into that box. So me and my wife always say too, because as you can see, I'm not dark skinned, but I'm Black, of course, and me and her about the same skin tone. We always say you Black, but you're not Black. So they can deal with you.
Okay. I have three questions here. So I announced this on the call last week. I have a problem with the term toxic masculinity. Just because the word and putting it with Black men, I have a problem with that. Toxic is to me a negative word, and they've already seen Black men as toxic. But I have a question here, and you can answer it if you'd like. Do you feel like you've learned toxic behavior primarily from your friends and peers, more so than adult male roles in your life? And then it says, was any of the toxic behavior learned from adult female role models, and what male toxic example comes to mind, and what has been the remedy to counter these actions or behaviors? And again, my idea of the word toxic, when you associate it with Black men, I'm not comfortable with that. But so if you feel like you want to answer that, we'll start with you. Go ahead, Pastor Lynch, and then we'll go around.
I think it really boils down to you're a product of your environment. I think you are what you eat. The people you associate with is ultimately going to be who you are, and like you said, the word toxic is really a strong word, but eventually if you're around people who degrade women, eventually you're going to degrade women. So I do think that it is an area where men need to associate, like for myself, around other Christian men, if that's the way that we're trying to live. Even growing up, that gang life had me confused, because at one point at home I was learning one thing, and in the gang life I was learning another thing. And the Bible says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. So I was really confused on who to be. But I think once you develop into manhood, and like I said, once you develop into wanting to be of service, you start surrounding yourself around those people. So you talk different, you act different, you be in different spaces, and then you start to develop those qualities of masculinity. But it's easy to get lured back into what you not want to be. And again, you're just a product of your environment. And sometimes, I mean, we all fall short, but I think that we have to be intentional as men on always trying to press forward into our manhood.
Okay. All right. Chief Lorking. So what do you think of that term toxic masculinity? And do you feel like if you believe in that language, do you feel like you learn toxic behavior from friends or peers or adult males if you buy into that word, which I really have a lot of problems with that and associated with Black men. But go ahead, Chief.
He's on mute.
Chief, you're on mute. You muted yourself. We can go ahead and
You're still muted, Chief.
you go ahead and talk, and then Chief, would you unmute yourself, please? So go ahead and talk
Okay.
about
There
toxic.
we go.
Oh,
Can you hear
okay.
me now?
Yes, we can.
Man, I got on a roll for a second there, but we've talked about this before, Carol. I think we talked about that toxic word before, and it's really made me think about that. We immediately attach that negative connotation. So just in my thoughts over the last couple of months about this, I've tried to flip that and turn that into what is natural masculinity and what is unnatural. Some of those things that I've been taught as a young boy getting into manhood, some things that men don't do are, one thing, for example, is cry. That is something very natural that everybody should do. That is a natural reaction sometimes. And sometimes to fight that is unnatural. That's definitely one thing away from that toxic word that I'd like to do is, do natural things as a man. Some of those things now that some people think are toxic are bad, but it's natural to men. We are natural protectors. And as you grow into a man, you learn to be more honest. You learn to live your life with integrity. You learn to treat others well with respect. That to me is what natural masculinity means, being a natural human being, really. But coming back to that protector stage of being a man, that's what I enjoy most about masculinity, and don't feel that is toxic at all.
Okay, and so I'm going to real quick give the definition of toxic masculinity. And the social science, toxic masculinity refers to traditional cultural masculine norms that can be harmful to men, women, and society overall. This concept of toxic masculinity is not intended to demonize men or male attributes, but rather to emphasize the harmful effects of conformity to certain traditions. And again, I understand it. I just wish there was a different word because toxic is associated with negative. So I just wanted to let everybody know what that was. So Mr. Stone, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, that whole joining the combination of toxic is pretty aggressive for somebody to stick with a scenario of masculinity, because you can be toxic anything, right? But maybe the person is saying, because it almost sounds like it's putting together some hate per se, and
Yeah.
hate's a terrible thing. Of course, hate's a terrible thing. But I would imagine that that's almost saying, that's putting a real big negative spin to it, saying that, okay, and especially if it's defined with Black folk, because that means that someone's generalizing us to say that we're obviously going to be doing something bad. Don't trust them to do this. They're going to be, they're going to be the same way every time. That's what you're going to get when you deal with them. All those kind of things that surround that. I would never want to put toxic with masculinity. Now, I would think of aggressive masculinity, because I know people that are over jealous and stuff, and men that are, what you doing looking at my woman, all that type of stuff,
Right.
I wouldn't even associate that with toxic. I would think of that as aggressive. But when you say toxic, then you're just immediately, pinpointing and that a person is going to be that negative thing every time. that bad thing every time. And if you associate that with masculinity and with a brother, then that's just saying, oh, this is what you're gonna get a hood rat every time. And I don't never like putting that kind of stigma on anybody, especially not a brother, because I've had that stuck on me so many times. I mean, I can imagine, the types of things that, people have probably thought that we can be or could be as in the negative manner. But toxic would not be one of the things that I would hope that somebody would ever stick to me, because that's just not, that doesn't sound cool. That just sounds bad in every way. If you want to say something bad about a masculinity scenario, hopefully they would say aggressively or anything but toxic, because that just makes it sound like masculine is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Masculine is a good thing. Of course, when used the right way, and it's like love. It's always going to be good when used the right way, but then there can be bad love if you want to kill somebody over love. So you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that toxic stick to it is.
I think it's the word, because I believe it's attributed to men being taught these things, not to cry, not to show emotions. But I agree with you.
See, for instance, being taught not to cry and being taught certain things from, to what it is to be a man, those things shouldn't be, I guess that's why I said to be an aggressive nature of masculinity or some other things that can be pushed to associate with being over masculine, if that's what they are meaning. That's because you can't, some people can be over masculine for sure. There's some people beating on their chest, when they don't need to be beaten on the chest, where everybody ain't got to be the top gorilla,
And again, it's really associated to you harming yourself for not being allowed to express your emotions and not being allowed to cry in public. But again, back to the same
It's
word.
funny that you say that. Not real quick though. For the longest, I remember the first time I cried. I was probably close to 30. I thought something was wrong with me because I could never cry. I went through so much that I was so hardened inside. And I remember the first time when I cried, it was a relief, as Brother Brian was saying. It was a relief. And after that, I felt so emotionally cool. I still don't cry a lot, but it felt good to be able to do that, because so anytime somebody's going to be putting a stigmatization on what you shouldn't do from a masculine standpoint and saying that it's toxic to do certain things, then hopefully, the people, whoever that is, can find another description or area to find some masculinity outreaches for themselves or something. That's what I'm trying to say.
Stay tuned for the next episode on how spaces define masculinity, a Black and Black biracial men's initiative.